Guard Thomas Hartwell straightened his shoulders as the black Rolls-Royce pulled up to the palace gates. The morning sun gleamed off his polished buttons and the ceremonial sword at his side. At 35, Thomas had served the crown for 12 years, earning respect through dedication and unwavering professionalism. Today would test those qualities in ways he never imagined. The car door opened, and out stepped Richard Blackstone, one of Britain's wealthiest businessmen. His tailored suit probably cost more than Thomas earned in 3 months, and his gold watch caught the light as he adjusted his silk tie. Blackstone owned hotels, restaurants, and shopping centers across Europe, with a reputation for getting whatever he wanted through money or intimidation. "You there, soldier?" Blackstone called out dismissively, not bothering to learn Thomas's rank or name. "I need to speak with someone important immediately. I have a meeting with the Queen's private secretary in 10 minutes. Thomas consulted his clipboard, checking the day's approved visitor list carefully. Royal protocol required strict adherence to security procedures, regardless of a visitor's wealth or status. Every name, every appointment had to be verified and confirmed through proper channels. "Sir, I don't see your name on today's visitor list," Thomas replied politely but firmly. "All appointments must be scheduled in advance through the proper office. I can provide you with the contact information if you'd like to arrange a future meeting." Blackstone's face reddened slightly, clearly unused to being told no by anyone, let alone someone he viewed as beneath his social standing. He stepped closer to Thomas, invading his personal space in an obvious attempt at intimidation. "Do you know who I am?" Blackstone demanded, his voice rising. "Employ over 10,000 people.
How do you make peanuts?
I pay more in taxes annually than you'll earn in your entire career. I don't wait in lines or fill out forms like common people." Thomas maintained his professional composure, though he could feel his jaw tightening at the man's arrogant tone. He had dealt with demanding visitors before, but rarely had someone been quite so openly contemptuous of royal protocol and basic courtesy. "Sir, I understand you're an important businessman, but palace security procedures apply to everyone equally. These rules exist to protect Her Majesty and all visitors. I'm happy to help you arrange a proper appointment through the correct channels." Blackstone reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick leather wallet. He extracted several crisp 100-pound notes and held them out toward Thomas with a condescending smile that never reached his cold eyes. "Look, son, let's not make this complicated. Here's 500 pounds. Just pretend you saw my name on that list and let me through. Everyone has a price, and I'm willing to pay yours. Think of it as a little bonus for being helpful." The offer hung in the air between them like a challenge. Thomas stared at the money for a long moment, not because he was tempted, but because he was genuinely shocked that someone would so brazenly attempt to bribe a royal guard. In his 12 years of service, no one had ever been quite so direct about trying to buy their way past security. Behind Blackstone, his driver and a personal assistant watched nervously from beside the Rolls-Royce. They clearly recognized the tension building in the situation, but neither dared to intervene when their employer was conducting business. Other guards at nearby posts had noticed the commotion and were watching carefully, ready to provide support if needed. Thomas could feel their eyes on him, knowing that his response to this situation would be remembered and talked about for months to come. The palace gates stood firm and unmoved behind Thomas, representing centuries of tradition, duty, and honor. These were values that couldn't be purchased with any amount of money, no matter how desperately someone might want to believe otherwise. Thomas looked from the money to Blackstone's expectant face, then back to the bills fluttering slightly in the morning breeze. The businessman clearly expected this transaction to proceed like all his others, with money changing hands and obstacles disappearing as if by magic. Sir Thomas began, his voice steady but carrying an edge of steel that hadn't been there. "Before, you're asking me to compromise my oath, my duty, and my integrity. That's not something I'm willing to discuss." Blackstone's confident expression faltered slightly, but his arrogance quickly reasserted itself as he waved the money more insistently, as if Thomas simply hadn't understood the generous nature of his offer. Blackstone's frustration boiled over as Thomas refused to take the money. The CEO was accustomed to purchasing solutions to problems, and Thomas's principled stance challenged everything he believed about human nature and the power of wealth. 500 isn't enough? Blackstone sneered, pulling out more bills. Fine, here's £1,000. It's probably 2 months' salary for someone like you. Take it and stop wasting my time with this ridiculous charade. Thomas stepped back, putting more distance between himself and the offered money. His fellow guards watched with growing amazement as their colleague faced down one of the country's most powerful businessmen without flinching. "Mr. Blackstone, I need you to understand something clearly," Thomas said, his voice carrying the authority of someone who had sworn an oath to serve something greater than himself. "I am a royal guard. My duty is to protect this palace and everyone in it. That duty cannot be bought, rented, or bargained away for any price." The businessman's face darkened with anger and disbelief. In his world, everyone had a price: politicians, judges, competitors, even family members. The idea that someone would turn down easy money for abstract concepts like duty and honor struck him as either naive or calculating. "Don't be ridiculous," Blackstone snapped. "Everyone takes money when it's offered. You're just holding out for more. Fine, £2,000 cash, right now. No questions asked, no records kept. Just let me through those gates." Thomas remained motionless, his hands clasped behind his back in the formal ATI's position he had been taught during his first week of guard training. The money meant nothing to him compared to the oath he had sworn and the trust placed in him by his superiors. "Sir, you're not listening to me," Thomas replied calmly. "This isn't about the amount of money you're offering. This is about following proper procedures that exist for everyone's safety and security. No amount of cash will change palace protocols." Blackstone's personal assistant, a nervous young woman named Catherine, finally worked up the courage to approach her employer. She had watched the exchange with growing alarm, recognizing that her boss was making a serious mistake. "Mr. Blackstone," she whispered urgently, "perhaps we should contact the palace office to reschedule your appointment properly. This approach isn't working, and we're drawing attention from other security personnel." But Blackstone was too invested in winning this confrontation to back down gracefully. His ego had been bruised by Thomas's refusal to be corrupted, and he was determined to prove that everyone had a price if you offered enough money. £3,000, Blackstone declared loudly, now attracting stares from tourists and other visitors in the area. "Final offer. Take the money, soldier, and let me handle my business with people who actually matter." The insult was deliberate and cutting, designed to make Thomas feel small and insignificant. But instead of achieving the desired effect, it only strengthened the guard's resolve to stand firm against this attempted corruption. Thomas looked Blackstone directly in the eyes, his own gaze unwavering and clear. "Mr. Blackstone, I've served my country for 12 years. I've been deployed overseas. I've protected dignitaries from around the world. And I've never once compromised my integrity for personal gain. I'm not going to start now." The rejection was so complete and final that Blackstone seemed genuinely shocked. He had built his fortune on the belief that everything and everyone could be bought if you offered the right price. Thomas's refusal to be corrupted challenged the very foundation of his worldview. "You're making a mistake," Blackstone warned, his tone turning threatening. "I have connections throughout the government. I could make one phone call and have your career ended by tomorrow morning. Don't be stupid about this." Thomas felt a chill run down his spine, not from fear, but from anger at the blatant threat. This wealthy bully was now attempting to intimidate him using his political connections, proving just how corrupt his approach to problem-solving really was. "Sir," Thomas said, his voice growing harder, "now you're threatening a royal guard in the performance of his duties. That's a serious offense that I'm required to report to my superiors. I suggest you reconsider your approach to this situation." The confrontation had drawn the attention of Sergeant Major William Reynolds, Thomas's commanding officer. Reynolds was a veteran with 25 years of service who had seen every type of difficult situation imaginable. He approached with measured steps, his experienced eyes taking in the scene quickly. "Is there a problem here, Guard Hartwell?" Reynolds asked, his tone professional but supportive. He had worked with Thomas for 6 years and knew him to be one of the most reliable and principled guards under his command. Blackstone immediately turned his attention to the senior officer, seeing an opportunity to assert his authority over what he viewed as subordinate personnel. His wealth and connections had always given him access to people in positions of power. Finally, someone with authority, Blackstone declared arrogantly, "Your guard here is being unreasonable. I have important business inside the palace, and he's refusing to let me pass despite my generous offer to compensate him for the inconvenience." Reynolds's expression hardened as he understood what had transpired. In his quarter-century of service, he had encountered plenty of wealthy individuals who believed money could override security protocols. But few had been quite so brazen about attempting bribery. "Mr. Blackstone," Reynolds said formally, "are you telling me that you offered money to one of my guards in exchange for bypassing established security procedures?" The CEO seemed oblivious to the danger in the sergeant major's tone. "Of course I did. I offered him £3,000, which is more than generous for such a small favor. Your guard is being unnecessarily difficult about routine business." Reynolds stepped closer, his military bearing making him appear even more imposing than his already considerable height suggested. "Sir, what you're describing isn't a small favor or routine business. It's attempted bribery of a royal guard, which is a criminal offense under British law." For the first time, Blackstone seemed to realize that his usual tactics might not work in this environment. His confidence wavered slightly as he looked between the two uniformed guards, both of whom regarded him with obvious disapproval. "Now wait just a minute," Blackstone backpedaled. "I was simply offering a gratuity for efficient service."
Oh.
"There's nothing illegal about tipping someone for doing their job well," Thomas spoke up, his voice clear and steady. "Sergeant Major, Mr. Blackstone specifically asked me to pretend his name was on the visitor list and allow him unauthorized access to the palace grounds. When I refused, he increased his offer to £3,000 and threatened to use his political connections to end my career." Reynolds nodded grimly. "Thank you for the report, Guard Hartwell. Mr. Blackstone, you need to understand that royal guards are not hotel doormen or restaurant staff. We are sworn officers charged with protecting the crown and maintaining the security of this facility. Attempting to bribe us is a serious crime." Catherine, Blackstone's assistant, had been frantically checking her phone and now approached her employer with obvious distress. "Sir, I've been trying to reach the palace office about your appointment. They have no record of any meeting scheduled for you today. Your secretary may have made an error in your calendar." The revelation hit Blackstone like a physical blow. Not only had he attempted to bribe his way into the palace, but there had been no legitimate reason for him to be there in the first place. His arrogance and sense of entitlement had led him into a potentially criminal situation over a non-existent appointment. Thomas watched as the reality of the situation dawned on the wealthy businessman. All of Blackstone's bluster and threats had been in service of gaining access to a meeting that had never been arranged. His attempted corruption had been completely unnecessary. "There seems to have been a misunderstanding," Blackstone said weakly, finally beginning to grasp the seriousness of his predicament. "Perhaps I should contact the palace office to clarify my appointment schedule." Reynolds was not inclined to let the matter drop so easily. "Sir, the misunderstanding is yours alone. You attempted to bribe a royal guard and threatened him when he refused to be corrupted. Those actions don't become acceptable just because your appointment doesn't exist." The crowd of onlookers had grown larger, with tourists and passers-by stopping to watch the confrontation unfold. Several people were recording the exchange on their phones, and Blackstone began to realize that his reputation could be seriously damaged if this incident became public knowledge. "Sergeant Major," Blackstone said, attempting to sound reasonable, "surely we can resolve this matter quietly. I made an error in judgment, but no harm was done. Perhaps we could discuss this privately." But Reynolds had no intention of allowing wealth and influence to override justice and accountability. Reynolds maintained his stern expression as he considered how to handle the situation. "Mr. Blackstone, there are proper procedures for dealing with attempted bribery of royal guards. I'm required to file a formal report with palace security, and they will determine whether to involve the Metropolitan Police." The color drained from Blackstone's face as the full implications of his actions became clear. A criminal investigation would be disastrous for his business empire, which depended heavily on government contracts and public reputation. His arrogance had potentially cost him everything he had worked to build. "Please," Blackstone said, his voice losing its commanding tone for the first time. "I realize I made a serious mistake. I was frustrated about the confusion with my appointment, and I reacted poorly. Surely there's a way to resolve this without involving the police." Thomas observed the transformation in the wealthy businessman with interest. Minutes earlier, Blackstone had been threatening to destroy his career through political connections. Now he was pleading for mercy from the same guard he had tried to corrupt and intimidate. "Mr. Blackstone," Thomas said quietly, "when you offered me money, you told me that everyone has a price. You were wrong about that. Some things can't be bought. Integrity, honor, duty, these aren't for sale at any price." The businessman looked at Thomas with something approaching respect for the first time. I can see that now. I've spent so many years in a world where everything is negotiable that I forgot there are still people who stand for something. More than personal gain?" Catherine stepped forward hesitantly. "Sergeant Major, if I may speak for my employer, Mr. Blackstone recognizes the seriousness of his error. He's prepared to make a formal apology and ensure that nothing like this ever happens again." Reynolds considered the offer carefully. "The decision about prosecution isn't mine to make alone. However, I will note in my report that Mr. Blackstone acknowledged his wrongdoing and expressed remorse for his actions." A palace security supervisor named Inspector Davies approached the group. Having been alerted to the situation by other guards, his arrival added another layer of official authority to the proceedings, making it clear that this incident would be thoroughly documented and investigated. Sergeant Major Reynolds Davies said formally, "I understand there's been an incident involving attempted bribery. Can you brief me on the situation?" Reynolds provided a concise summary of events while Thomas stood at attention, ready to provide additional details if needed. Blackstone listened with growing anxiety as his attempted corruption was officially documented by multiple law enforcement personnel. "Mr. Blackstone," Inspector Davies addressed the businessman directly, "you should understand that bribery of royal guards is taken very seriously by palace security and the courts. This isn't a matter that can be resolved with more money or political influence." The irony wasn't lost on anyone present. The man who had tried to buy his way past security was now learning that some problems couldn't be solved with wealth or connections. His usual tools of persuasion were useless in this situation. "I understand completely," Blackstone replied humbly. "I want to cooperate fully with any investigation and make whatever amends are appropriate. My behavior was inexcusable, and I take full responsibility for my actions." Thomas felt a mixture of satisfaction and pity as he watched the arrogant businessman humble himself before the very people he had tried to corrupt and intimidate. The lesson was harsh, but necessary. Respect and integrity couldn't be purchased. "Like commodities, Guard Hartwell," Inspector Davies said, "your conduct in this situation has been exemplary. You maintained your professionalism and integrity despite significant pressure and inducement to compromise your duties." The recognition felt good, but Thomas knew he had simply done what any honest guard should do. "Thank you, sir. I was just following my training and my conscience." Reynolds nodded approvingly. "This is exactly the kind of principled behavior we expect from our guards. You've honored the uniform and the oath you swore when you joined the Royal Guard." As the official documentation continued, word of the incident began spreading through the Palace Guard network. Stories of Thomas's refusal to be corrupted and his firm stand against intimidation would be told and retold, inspiring other guards to maintain their own high standards of integrity. 3 days later, Thomas was summoned to the office of Colonel Patricia Ashford, the commanding officer of the entire Royal Guard Division. He had never met the colonel personally, despite his 12 years of service, and he worried that the incident with Blackstone might have created problems he hadn't anticipated. "Colonel?" Ashford's office was filled with commendations, photographs with various members of the royal family, and mementos from her 30-year military career. She looked up from a thick file as Thomas entered and saluted smartly. "At ease, Guard Hartwell," she said with a slight smile. "Please have a seat. We need to discuss the events of Monday morning." Thomas sat rigidly, unsure whether he was about to be commended or reprimanded. The file on the colonel's desk was clearly related to the Blackstone incident, and its thickness suggested that the matter had generated significant attention from higher authorities. Guard Hartwell, I've read the reports from Sergeant Major Reynolds and Inspector Davies, Colonel Ashford began. I've also reviewed your service record, which shows 12 years of exemplary conduct and dedication. What I want to know is how you felt during that confrontation with Mr. Blackstone. The question surprised Thomas. He had expected to discuss procedures and protocols, not his personal reactions to the situation. Ma'am, I felt disappointed that someone would assume I could be bought, but also determined to uphold the standards of the Royal Guard. Colonel Ashford nodded thoughtfully. Mr. Blackstone has significant political connections, as I'm sure you realized. He could potentially make life difficult for individual guards who cross him. Weren't you concerned about possible retaliation? Thomas considered his answer carefully. Ma'am, when I took my oath as a Royal Guard, I swore to serve with honor, regardless of personal consequences. If I had compromised that oath for fear of retaliation, I would have proven myself unworthy of wearing this uniform. The colonel's smile broadened. That's exactly the answer I hope to hear. Guard Hartwell, your actions have attracted attention from the very highest levels of palace administration. The Queen's private secretary has specifically requested a meeting with you. Thomas felt his stomach drop. A meeting with the Queen's private secretary could mean anything from recognition to dismissal, and he had no way of knowing which direction it would take. Don't look so worried, Colonel Ashford laughed. The attention you've received is entirely positive. Your refusal to be corrupted and your professional handling of a difficult situation have been noted and appreciated by everyone involved in palace security. Meanwhile, across London, Richard Blackstone sat in his corporate boardroom facing a crisis management team of lawyers and public relations specialists. Word of his attempted bribery had leaked to the press, and several major business partners were reconsidering their relationships with his companies. Richard, said his lead attorney, the palace has agreed not to pursue criminal charges in exchange for a formal public apology and a substantial charitable donation to a veterans organization. You need to accept this deal before they change their minds. Blackstone stared out the window at the city, where he had built his fortune through ruthless business practices and strategic corruption. For the first time in decades, he had encountered someone who couldn't be bought, and that encounter was threatening to destroy everything he had achieved. How much are we talking about for the charitable donation? He asked wearily. £2 million, the attorney replied. It's substantial, but it's far less than what you'd lose if this matter went to court and resulted in criminal convictions. The irony was bitter. Blackstone was being forced to pay a much larger sum than the £3,000 Thomas had refused to accept. His attempted corruption had cost him far more than simple compliance with palace procedures would have. Back at the palace, Thomas continued his regular duties while trying to process the unexpected attention his actions had generated. Fellow guards treated him with increased respect. Several had approached him privately to thank him for upholding the honor of their profession. Sergeant, Major Reynolds found Thomas during his afternoon patrol. Hartwell, I wanted you to know that recruitment officers are using your example as a training tool for new guards. Your actions have become a case study in professional integrity. Thomas felt humbled by the recognition. Sergeant Major, I hope other guards understand that. I wasn't trying to be heroic. I was just doing my job according to the oath I swore. Reynolds nodded approvingly. That's exactly what makes your actions so significant. You treated integrity as a routine part of your duties, not as something extraordinary. That's the standard we want all our guards to maintain. The next morning, Thomas reported to the Queen's private secretary, as instructed. Sir Geoffrey Pemberton was an elegant man in his 60s, who had served the royal household for over 20 years with distinction and discretion. Guard Hartwell, Sir Geoffrey said warmly. Please sit down. I wanted to personally thank you for your exemplary conduct during the incident with Mr. Blackstone. Your actions reflected the highest traditions of service to the Crown. Sir Geoffrey leaned back in his chair, studying Thomas with the keen eyes of someone who had spent decades evaluating character and integrity. Guard Hartwell, Her Majesty has been personally briefed on your actions during the Blackstone incident. She wanted me to convey her appreciation for your unwavering dedication to duty. Thomas felt overwhelmed by the knowledge that his actions had been noticed at the highest levels of the royal household. "Sir Geoffrey, I was simply following my training and my conscience. Any guard in my position should have done the same thing."
Perhaps
"They should have," Sir Geoffrey agreed, "but experience tells us that not everyone would have shown your level of integrity. When faced with such significant temptation and pressure, that's what makes your conduct noteworthy." The private secretary opened a folder on his desk and withdrew an official document bearing the royal seal. "Guard Hartwell, you are hereby awarded the Royal Household Long and Faithful Service Medal, with a special commendation for exceptional integrity in the performance of your duties." Thomas stared at the medal and citation in shock. The recognition was far beyond anything he had imagined possible when he refused Blackstone's bribe. His simple adherence to his oath had earned him one of the highest honors available to palace staff. "Thank you, sir," Thomas managed to say. "I'm deeply honored by this recognition." Sir Geoffrey smiled warmly. "The honor is ours, Guard Hartwell. You've reminded everyone in this household why integrity and duty matter more than personal gain. That's a lesson worth remembering in any age." As Thomas left the private secretary's office, he reflected on how much had changed since that morning when Richard Blackstone had tried to buy his cooperation. The incident had tested his values and proven to himself that his principles were stronger than any temptation. 6 months later, the story had taken on a life of its own throughout the Royal Guard ranks. New recruits were taught about the Hartwell Standard, an expectation that guards would maintain their integrity regardless of pressure, threats, or inducements. Richard Blackstone had made his public apology and paid his substantial fine to the veterans' charity as agreed. The incident had cost him several major business contracts and damaged his reputation permanently. He had learned the hard way that some people couldn't be bought and that respect had to be earned rather than purchased. In a surprising turn of events, Blackstone requested a private meeting with Thomas through palace officials. The meeting was approved and took place in a neutral conference room under the supervision of Colonel Ashford. "Guard Hartwell," Blackstone said humbly, looking genuinely different from the arrogant man who had tried to bribe his way into the palace. "I wanted to apologize personally for my behavior. I treated you with disrespect and tried to corrupt you because I believed everyone had a price. You proved me wrong." Thomas studied the businessman carefully, seeing what appeared to be genuine remorse in his eyes. "Mr. Blackstone, I accept your apology. I hope you understand now that integrity isn't something that can be bought or sold." Blackstone nodded thoughtfully. "I've spent the last 6 months examining my business practices and personal values. Your example made me realize how far I had strayed from the principles my father taught me when I was young. I'm trying to rebuild my companies on a foundation of honest dealing rather than corruption." The conversation continued for nearly an hour, with Blackstone asking questions about duty, service, and the satisfaction that came from principled behavior. Thomas found himself genuinely impressed by the man's apparent transformation. As they prepared to leave, Blackstone made one final request. "Guard Hartwell, I know this might seem strange coming from me, but I wondered if you might consider speaking to my senior executives about integrity in business. Your example could help us build a better company culture." Thomas was surprised by the request, but agreed to consider it. The man who had once tried to corrupt him was now asking for guidance on how to live and work with greater integrity. Years later, Thomas continued to serve as a royal guard with distinction. The Blackstone incident had become legendary among palace staff, and the medal he received hung proudly in his modest apartment. More importantly, his example had inspired countless other guards to maintain their own high standards of conduct. Richard Blackstone transformed his business empire. Over the following years, implementing ethical practices and supporting charitable causes, he often credited his encounter with Guard Thomas Hartwell as the turning point that made him reconsider his approach to success and power. During Thomas's retirement ceremony 15 years later, Colonel Ashford spoke about his legacy to the assembled guards. "Guard Hartwell proved that respect cannot be bought, integrity cannot be compromised, and duty cannot be negotiated. He showed us all that the highest form of service is staying true to your principles regardless of the cost." As Thomas hung up his uniform for the final time, he reflected on the simple truth that had guided his career. Some things in life were more valuable than money, and the respect earned through honest service was worth more than any amount a wealthy man might offer in exchange for corruption. The royal guard had stood firm that day, not just protecting the palace gates, but protecting the timeless values that made service to the crown meaningful and honorable.